Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. It was called Empathological Fallacies. I'm not sure empathological is a word, but there you go. Anyway, as it starts, we're listening to the dictation of an outgoing communication from T'Lyn to the captain of her previous Vulcan ship. And in it, she details the fact that the Cerritos is escorting 3 Betazoid diplomats to Risa because of the recent attacks on various ships for their security, after the diplomats had spent time on Angel 1, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a reference to a first season episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Anyway, these diplomats are particularly party-minded and apparently a bit randy, which the crew seems to like, but which T'Lyn does not. It turns out that she can't actually send her message, though, because there's a total communication blackout while the diplomats are aboard, once again for security purposes. Mariner invites T'Lyn to a celebration in honor of the diplomats, but she declines to attend. Meanwhile, we find that BOIMLER is a little unnerved because he can't seem to remember the names of every single crew member on board, which prompts Rutherford to tell the security chief, Shax, that he thinks BOIMLER might be a candidate for something called the program. Back to T'Lyn, she decides to go to the party anyway, and she asks Tendi when she might be able to send her message. And she finds that the crew members are all experiencing emotions at a very high level, which the captain happens to notice as well. BOIMLER's taken by Shax to a part of the ship he's never been to before and sent into a slam poetry session being conducted by a few security officers. And one of the poems being recited is a particularly jaunty one about Worf. T'Lyn, meanwhile, suspects that the diplomats are suffering from xanthe fever, which causes older Betazoids to telepathically project emotions onto everyone. But it seems from some telepathic communication between the diplomats that something else is afoot, especially after they go to sickbay and nothing is found. So the captain orders them confined to quarters, at which point they stop pretending to just be diplomats on their way to Risa and pull some Charlie's Angels moves on the crew located in sickbay to incapacitate them, and then tell the captain that she's going with them. Back in the poetry slam, we find the Temerian crew member performing a poem about Odo, just before BOIMLER is told to choose a task to complete among 2 options, a Captain Archer puzzle and a tarot card reading, but he accidentally chooses both. We then learn that the diplomats are actually officers from the Betazoid Intelligence Agency on an undercover mission to telepathically collect information that would help figure out who's been destroying various ships, and that they're also being affected by whatever is amplifying everyone's emotions, which turns out to be T'Lyn, unbeknownst to her. And it's because she's experiencing early onset Bandai syndrome, which is weird. The Betazoids reason that they need to take the ship to Beta Z to straighten everything out, and they chart a course there through the neutral zone, and the captain has to trick them into turning on each other so as to try to get control back before the neutral zone treaty is violated. After they both have to run from a bunch of crazed crew members, T'Lyn tells Mariner how it is that she came to be aboard the ship in a moment of self-doubt, where she feels like she's not Vulcan enough, not only because of what happened that got her kicked off her other ship, but because of the fact that she seems to be suffering from early onset Bandai syndrome, causing everyone to lose their minds out of frustration over not being able to send a message to her ship. Mariner, however, assures her that she didn't do anything wrong and that she's more than Vulcan enough and that everything's fine. And this actually calms her down and gets rid of all the emotional broadcasting she was doing and allows the crew to get back to normal. During all this, the security team, which was immune to all the emotional craziness because they do their slam poetry and it evens them out, realize what's happening and they take back the bridge. In the end, T'Lyn decides not to send her message, in which, out of frustration with the non-Vulcan crew, she had requested to be taken back onto her own ship. Because now, according to her, she wants to stay on the Cerritos and study the chaotic ways of the crew. But, of course, it's really just because now she's made friends with the people there, which is really cool. So I did like this episode. I didn't think it was anything fantastic, but I enjoyed it. I really am liking the T'Lyn character. She's very funny and very cool. And, you know, the whole thing with the Beta Zeds was pretty funny because they were acting like, you know, the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. and it was, it made for some funny moments. And I thought the whole slam poetry thing with the security officers was funny because, Shax talks about how the job of security people is to not only safeguard the lives of the crew, in terms of whether they're breathing, but also their mental health, which I thought was an interesting take. So that was cool. And during the whole, thing, the doctor character was going crazy and acting like a feral cat because of, the emotional broadcasting that Talin was doing. And that was kind of funny. And there was a running joke about how, when the members of her species go feral, they sometimes eat other people. So that was kind of funny. So, it was an entertaining episode, but I didn't think it was anything spectacular. And I think that's because they were really light on the references in this episode. And what tends to make these episodes very enjoyable is the breakneck speed at which they do tons and tons of references, which doesn't necessarily speak highly of it because it makes it seem like they rely on that to have anything at all in their episodes, and which I suppose is kind of true. But if that's true, so be it. That's really what makes the show great when it's great, is the constant references to other stuff. And there were a few here, but not very many. The other thing that makes the show good is the aspect of it that has heart, and there was some of that here because Mariner has to sort of buck up to Lynn and makes her feel better in the episode. And that was good. And in the end, she decides to stay, and I like that because she's finding her place among the Cerritos crew, which is good. But I didn't think it was anything spectacular. So I'm a little concerned that there hasn't been a lot of substance to the show in these last few episodes. It's been funny and everything, but nothing, mind blowing. And it might be sort of running its course. It might be that this should be the last season, and we'll see whether or not it is, at some point. But it may just be that they're getting to the end of their, concept and how far they can take it. But it certainly wasn't bad. There was nothing bad about it, so that's good. And there still is the underlying plot of, who's going around destroying the ships, and I do still want to see what that's about and how they're going to resolve it. So this was only episode 5. There are a bunch of episodes left, so I'll definitely be back to do a recap and review of the rest of the season, starting with next week's episode. For now, I'm going to get out of here. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.